John, if that's okay. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Liz Brandel. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Morningstar Living, and welcome to our Eventful Living seminar this morning. I know that we've got many of our residents are here, but I see a lot of outside guests also, so welcome to Moravian Hall Square. We have some very, very dedicated gardeners in our campus here, both here at Moravian Hall Square and also at Heritage Village. In Moravian Hall Square, we're set on about 17 acres here, much of which is beautiful parkland. You don't see it as you're driving into the parking lot, but on the other side, beautiful parkland that we're set on here. And many of our residents who have been keen gardeners all of their life continue to garden here. Shirley's a great example. She's out there every day in the gardens, and we too over at Heritage Village, we have village gardens, vegetable gardens where they grow flowers and vegetables over there also. So we offer great opportunities for folks to continue doing what they love to do when they live at our campuses. So thank you for sharing your talents as residents when you keep our campuses so beautiful and green and colourful. Alrighty, so today we are first of all, can I just ask if everyone can silence their phones? We didn't used to worry about phones, but now we do. And the person whose phone is ringing is always the person that doesn't recognize their own ringtone. So please make sure your phones are silenced. If you have to use a restroom, gents is right carry corner to this room here. Ladies is to your right going out the door and on your left past the elevator. If you're up and about and going out to the restroom, please use the door at the back there just to minimize the disturbance of the seminar here. So today we're fortunate to have a wonderful Master Gardener with us. John Drabick is with us from the Penn State Master Gardener program at Lehigh County. And today he's going to tell us all things to do with compost. So we're very excited because we do have great composting programs going on here, so we know we're going to learn a whole lot more from John. So thank you. One more hand for John Drabick. Ready?
Okay, so can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Great. All right, so a little bit about myself. My great-grandmother came over from Ukraine, and she and her husband bought a farm. So I was brought up farming community. Had a huge truck patch there, so that's where I, cut my teeth on learning how to grow vegetables. And my wife and I both got into the Penn State Master Gardener program. My wife got into it first. She's been in it for 26 years. She actually became the Penn State Master Gardener Coordinator for Lehigh and Northampton counties. And then they came to a point where they were looking for people who like to speak to groups. And not everybody likes to do that. So they happened to have an evening class at the time, and I enjoy speaking in front of groups because I used to be a trainer for safety and environmental. So here I am. So I've been a Master Gardener now for 21 years myself through the Penn State Cooperative Extension Program. So I'm not a graduate of Penn State. I'm actually a graduate of Lafayette College in Easton. If anybody knows that school. See your hands there. So I'm a chemical engineer by degree, so I know how to follow recipes. And we're going to tell you about the recipe of how to make compost today. So anybody has questions as we go along, feel free, very informal. I actually like Liz's title for the program better than mine, Composting, the rotten truth about it. Okay, so basically what is composting? It's recycling naturally. And what we're going to talk about is how we can take that process of natural decay and accelerate it to our benefit so that we can come up with this, what I call black gold for our gardens. Okay, so we're going to have different listings of what we could put in and what we shouldn't put in compost. I'm going to talk mainly about 3 colors. I'm going to talk about green, brown, and black. Okay, green is going to represent your nitrogens. Brown is going to represent the carbons and other foods they're going to be putting in there. And black is going to represent either already finished compost or garden soil or something that already has the microbes in there that we're going to use to make our compost. So how many of you have composted already? Good. So I have some people in here who can share some of our experiences. So some of the foods we're going to talk about, grass clippings. Grass clippings is a good one, but what we're actually pushing at Penn State is leave it on your lawn. Okay, grass clippings gets into the waste stream and it generates a lot of yard waste that really could benefit the lawn by staying there and nutrifying the lawn. Okay, so you're spending money to put on weed and feed, so you're putting nitrogen and other organics into your lawn to try and make your lawn look better, and then you're cutting it off and throwing it away. So you're basically throwing away your money. So that's why we really do like using lawn mowers that will return the clippings right back into the lawn, because it does save on money and saves on landfill space. So composting, how are we going to speed up this natural decay process? Basically, compost is no different than us. We need food, we need shelter, we need water. So they need food, they need water, they need air, and they need the right temperature to get a good compost. So by managing these factors, we're going to be able to take care of taking something that's a long decay process. Who's ever put your hand underneath the leaves in the woods and come up with a nice rich handful of humus? Okay, that's beautiful material, but it takes years and years to get to that point. Okay, so what we're going to be able to do is take kitchen scraps and other yard waste and have finished compost in about 12 weeks. So by doing these processes, we're going to be able to add all that material to our lawns or gardens, vegetables, flower plants, etc., and we're going to have a great addition to our soil. So limited landfill space should be reserved for materials that can't be recycled or composted. We had some statistics when I originally started this program. This was based on statistics from 1998. The last report I got from the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection was done in 2021. So garbage handling is a huge cost for the cities. It takes up a lot of space. And how many of you would really like to see a landfill in your backyard? Not too many. Okay? It's the NIMBY syndrome, right? Not in my backyard. I don't want a landfill there. We want to minimize how many landfills we have to have and what we're putting in there so that we can make the ones that we do have last a lot longer. But sadly, just from 2021, even though we have these Leave It on the Lawn programs, even though we have recycling programs, there's still a lot of stuff going into the landfills that shouldn't be there. I'm just going to read a couple of numbers here. Organic material, that's stuff that can be broken down through composting and other means. Almost 40% of the waste stream going into landfills is organic material. Paper, okay, paper is almost 26% going into landfills. Even though we have, pick up at the curb and other recycling programs, people are still putting paper in their trash. The good news is we have reduced the amount of metals and glass going into the landfills. The recycling programs are working, but there's been an explosion of plastic materials. And the plastics still make up almost 20% of what goes into landfills. Now this is a combination of residential and industrial waste going into the landfills. But just breaking it down by residential, I just wanted to see what we could do personally on a level from somebody who's a typical household. But I was very surprised that even from the typical household, we still have almost 20%, 26% of the waste going into their trash is paper. Organics, almost 40%. So when we add everything up, what could be composted is nearly 65% of what's going in their trash stream. Now, I am very picky. My wife calls me the composting Nazi. I am very strict about what goes into our trash and what doesn't. We have 3 adults living in our house, 2 cats and 3 dogs. How many trash bags do you think I put out a week? Not quite 1. I put out less than a full bag of trash a week because of everything that I recycle through our curbside recycling and through what I do with my compost. So very little goes into my trash stream. Yes, I do have to get rid of my cat litter waste, okay, dog waste, but very little goes in there. So this is my under the kitchen sink collector. I take this out probably 4 or 5 times a week because we love eating salads. We love eating a lot of fresh stuff from our gardens. So what do you think from our kitchen scraps goes in here? Don't be shy, come on. Coffee grounds, perfect. Eggshells, yep. What else? Tea bags.
Shredded paper.
You can do shredded paper, absolutely. What is the best way?
You can compost paper?
Yes, absolutely. It's the best way to avoid identity theft. You have a shredder, you can shred your paper because you want to rip it up into smaller pieces, but that will definitely decompose in your composter. Yeah. A lot of people are surprised by that. But yeah, all I have to say is think of this as being a vegetarian or fruitarian. You don't want meat or fish, but anything else that's organic, your salad greens, any kind of nut shells, fruit pits, all that stuff can go in there, and that can go in your compost. So,
You put seed in, like tomato seeds or cucumber seeds, or
yes, absolutely, and I'll show you that. I'll show you why that turns out to be a very good indicator for you later on for your compost.
okay.
So that's all I want to do as far as statistics. I don't want to have any other dry stuff. We're going to get more into how to make this compost now. So decomposers are your big work crew. You're going to have microbes. You're going to have fungi. You can't be squeamish because there are going to be bugs in there. You're going to have pill bugs and other critters in there that are going to help out being part of these decomposers and breaking down that material. Food for the decomposers, any organic materials that are in there. And then you're going to want to have the right amount of water, the right amount of air, and we'll get into a little more detail on that. So who saw the baseball movie, Field of Dreams? Okay, great movie. I loved that. Yeah. So what'd they say in there? If you build it, they will come. Okay, so if you build a composter, they will come. You do not need to go to a box store and buy a composter starter kit. Okay? All you need is some soil, the garden soil, the soil right out of the ground. That already has some microbes in it. That already has those bacteria in there. You need some leaves. You need some food scraps. You can use manure. I have never used manure in mine, but if you have it readily available, that's something you can use. Chicken manure, pig manure, cow manure. All we're trying to say is, what is this?
Oh, it's a vegetarian.
Vegetarian, right. So do I want to put animal waste in here that are carnivores? Do I want to put cat waste or dog waste in here? No. Okay, you can put in horse manure, cow manure, pig manure, chicken manure. You want to do anything that's, a vegetarian, but you don't want to put anything in there that's a carnivore. You could pass on some diseases and things like that, so they recommend not putting that in there. One vegetarian manure, yes. Just think of that as being vegetarian and you're going to be safe. So 1 teaspoon, just 1 little teaspoon of good garden soil can have over 100 million bacteria in there. Now bacteria obviously are tiny little critters, but they're going to be in there and they're going to be chewing away on that food for you and helping to reduce the size of it. And you can have over 800 feet of fungal threads just in a teaspoon of soil. The largest living creature, or whatever you want to call it, on Earth is actually a giant underground fungal mass out in Colorado. So fungi is very important to this process as well. So as I said, you don't have to go to the box stores. You don't need this stuff. It's just a good sales pitch. They just want your greens, your dollars, I mean, not your composting greens. You don't need that at all. This is what you're going to use. Your garden trimmings. You know, late fall, early winter, late winter, when you're out there doing your pruning, you want to collect all your garden trimmings, and you can use those as part of your feed. A lot of those, especially the tougher materials, when you're cutting your ornamental grasses or when you're pruning your shrubs, you're going to have harder material. That's going to be your browns. Okay, the harder material is typically your carbon-based material. That's going to be your brown material to feed the compost. Kitchen scraps and grass clippings, we consider those greens. They're typically softer. They have more nitrogen to them. So they're going to be helping to generate heat and provide nitrogen and water to your compost. Leaves, again, are your browns. Seasonally, when do you typically get brown material? In the fall. Okay? When do you typically get the greens? Spring and summer. So sometimes the overlap isn't quite perfect. You can stockpile leaves. You can stockpile twigs and small branches. Also, other things you can use. We talked about manure, but you can also use potting soil. It already has your microbes and your bacteria and fungi in there. Sawdust. Be wary about sawdust. It's wood material, so it's considered a brown. It's good for supplying carbon. It's good because it's small. The microbes and bacteria, fungi can break it down very easily. However, it's also very small and will block your airflow. So if you get too much of it, it could suffocate your compost. So you want to fluff up your compost. You want to mix that sawdust in there so it's not just packed down in one layer and causing a problem with airflow. Hair. If you cut your hair, or if you have pets, the hair can go right in the compost as well, because that'll break down. Yes?
Pine needles.
Absolutely. Yes. Pine needle mulch, that breaks down into beautiful humus as well. So the pine needles can go right into the compost and they'll break down. Things to avoid. Okay, remember, you're feeding a vegetarian. They don't want oil, they don't want fat, they don't want grease, meat, fish, or dairy products. I have never ever washed eggshells in my life. All I do is I take them, I crush them with my hand, and I throw them in the bin. Okay, and I've never had problems with vermin. I used to live near the Lehigh River. The only critter I had going in my compost pile was a meadow vole, because one year I had potatoes sprout inside my bin, and I just left them grow out of my compost bin, and he and I shared our harvest. So he was chewing on some of my potatoes. But I've never had any rats, I've never had any mice, I've never had raccoons or anything else bothering my compost. As long as you keep these things out, you should not have any problems with vermin. The only thing I would see was kitty cat paw prints going across the top of my lids. Hard to kill weeds. As a master gardener, we have to do presentations or other things, programs where we go and do outreach for the public, but we also have to get continuing education. So that keeps our certification as a master gardener. I've been to several different conferences and gone to update training for composting, and it's interesting to see how the different professors present on compost. Hard to kill weeds, such as the bindweed and quackgrass, people typically say keep out, but what about other things? Your common crabgrass, your dandelion, things like that. Depending on which professor you talk to, is how they're going to answer. One person says no, the other person says yes. Here's the reasoning. One guy said, if you can keep it out, then you won't get it spreading in your garden. The other guy says, where did it come from in the first place? Your garden. It's already there. If you're keeping it out of your compost, you may be missing out on some extra food for your compost. So for myself, I throw the dandelion and other weeds in there that I'm pulling out of my flower bed. They'll go in there. The seed heads themselves, I try to avoid, but they end up typically getting returned to the lawn anyway because I have a lawnmower that just puts everything right back on the lawn. Questions so far?
If you put the grass clippings on your lawn, is it necessary to hire a lawn service to fertilize and that sort of thing?
That's a good answer. Good question. Sorry. If you do regular maintenance on your lawn and you're returning the clippings to the lawn, it'll help keep it healthy. A lawn service is there to make money. Let's face facts. They're going to come out, they're going to tell you you're going to need to put chemicals on your lawn all the time. All you're doing is you're putting on extra nitrogen that's getting washed off, going into the rivers and streams and contaminating the Chesapeake and the Susquehanna and the Delaware rivers and getting into the bays and causing algae blooms and all kinds of other things. A small amount of nitrogen is good. The amount of nitrogen they typically put on is overkill, and you're really losing a lot of it. One way to do it is actually by using compost. We had a master gardener who would aerate his lawn once a year in the fall. He'd go through and pull the plugs, to aerate his lawn, and then he would take compost and he would rake it across his lawn and his grass was the greenest grass I have ever seen in my life. Now he also cut it at the highest level, and but he had beautiful lawn, and he did not fertilize. He just used the compost. But I'm not saying you may not need a little fertilizer. Typically, the Penn State recommendation is you do around Memorial Day, around Labor Day, and around Thanksgiving. You can put feedings on if you want, but definitely follow the recommendations on the packaging. You don't want to over-fertilize. You want to try and feed your lawn and let it sit and soak in slow. You don't want to have, put on the lawn, have it, like a deluge we had the other night, 2 to 3 inches of rain come down all at one shot. That's not going in your lawn, that's going in the river. So you want to have a nice steady rain if you can, plan to do it ahead of time. Good question. Whoops. Okay, some other materials to avoid. Compost is great. Mother Nature knows how to take care of herself. When you put the stuff in the compost bin, everything's going to be working. Temperature is going to be between 55 degrees and 155 degrees. It's going to be working. It's going to be decomposing and breaking things down. It's going to give you a pH almost a perfect 7 is neutral. It'll be in a range around 6.7 to around 7.2. It really just loves that natural range of neutral. If you add something like lime to it, it's going to push the pH up, and that's going to cause problems. Because if you have something that's too much with a high pH, you can get ammonia odors. So you're very aware of what that ammonia smell is like. If If you smell ammonia, you want to get in there, you want to turn your compost, get more air into it. That'll help dissipate that ammonia odor. And you want to minimize the amount of greens you have going into it. You want to put more brown material into it. Wood ash. Wood ash, coal ash. If you have a wood stove or a coal stove, you can put some of that ash in there, but again, you got to worry about the fines. It could suffocate your compost, and it also can mess around with your pH a little bit. So you just want to be sparing with that, and you want to make sure you turn over your compost real well so that you don't have it choking it out. Again, if you smell that ammonia odor, it's a little too much, or you're not getting enough air in there. So the smaller particles decompose faster. You've ever heard the joke, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? So the microbes and your fungi, they have a hard time chewing on a big leaf. Okay, so you break that up by hand into smaller pieces, they've got more edges to chew on. If you have a chipper shredder or a lawnmower and you run over those leaves, they're going to be much smaller and they can chew on that a lot faster. One of the best gifts my wife ever gave me years and years ago, probably close to 25 now, she bought me a chipper shredder from Sears as a Father's Day gift. I love this thing. It still runs. I could take anything up to the size of a 3-inch branch, 3-inch diameter branch, and put it in that thing and it'll chip it down. And it has a 14-to-1 reduction cycle. So something at 3 inches will shred down to just little chips and shreds that can be chewed up by the bacteria and the fungi a lot faster. As I said in my intro, I used to do safety and environmental. So I highly discourage people from using a lawnmower to run over anything hard. You know, small twigs maybe. Run over your tomato vines and your cucumber vines, not a problem. But you don't want to run over any hard branches. Does anybody want to know why? Missile. That thing can shoot out of there at over 80 miles per hour. And what's down in that zone? Your feet, your lower legs. We've actually taken pictures of people having stuff that actually shot through their wall of their drywall in their house.
Kid on a bike in the next driveway.
Yeah. So you don't want to, do anything solid. That's why a chipper shredder is better for the harder stuff. Lawnmower is perfect for leaves and for the softer materials. Just a little safety adder there. So the smaller the pieces, the faster it'll decompose. So that'll help you out with reaching your 12-week turnaround. Allows the microbes to get more food. That chipping and shredding takes that coarse material and breaks it down. Also decreases the airflow, so you got to be careful. You still want some coarse materials in there. Good coarse materials in there, corn cobs, some corn stalk material. My neighbor actually has piping that he puts in his that has air holes in it. Now that's, a little beyond what you really need, but you do need some air spaces, air pockets in there. So you want to keep that fluffed up so you get some airflow. Piles should be turned more often if you start getting any anaerobic conditions. If you smell rotten egg or you smell ammonia, you want to have turn that over. So more about the food. Composting will be most rapid if you have a good combination. I like to say, make a compost lasagna. Okay, if you can put it in when you're starting off, you put in some green material, whether it's your kitchen scraps or some grass clippings. By the way, the only time I collect grass clippings is in the spring, when I want to kickstart my compost and get it heated up. Otherwise, I just put it right back on the lawn. But my brown materials, from leaves I have laying around or from my pruning that I've done, typically I do my pruning in late winter when everything is still dormant. I take that material and I pile it up in my compost bin. And then when I'm ready to go, I'll put that stuff through the shredder and I'll mix in some of the greens. So you have some browns and some greens. By the way, what color would you classify coffee grounds as? Green, brown, or black? Green. Now, a lot of people don't realize coffee grounds are a beautiful nitrogen source. So coffee grounds are greens. So what do you see here with the numbers? That's the ratio of carbon to nitrogen. So your brown materials are heavy on carbon, which is necessary for your compost. But you need nitrogen to generate some heat as well. So you'll use some of these carbons. So you got your leaves, straw, especially straw mixed with manure is good. Paper, you see 150 to 200 parts of carbon to 1 part of nitrogen. Because what does paper come from? Trees, wood, yeah. So you see you got the high concentration there, your sawdust, 100 to 500. Animal bedding mixed with manure. It's lower because it's mixed with the manure because that's going to give you a good source of nitrogen as well. Okay, so your vegetable scraps, beautiful stuff. Coffee grounds, part of your greens. 20 to 1. So it has carbon in it, but it's a much lower ratio. It has more nitrogen. Grass clippings. So will green material compost by itself? Yes, it will. How many of you have taken a pile of grass clippings and just left it in the back and then come back later and found it? What do you see? It gets hot. It gets warm. Sometimes if it actually dries out, you can actually see smoke coming out because it can ignite. It can get to that point where it can actually ignite the top part that's dry. Yeah, many a barn has found that out. Anybody here ever bale hay? Yeah, I used to work on a dairy farm, so. Yeah, I've seen unfortunate, matter of fact, the last place I lived up in Laurie Station and right across the street, a farmer lost his barn because the hay hadn't been dried out enough. Okay, the manure, again, real good sources. Cow manure, I grew up around dairy farms. I love the smell of cow manure. I might be a little weird there, but that's me. Horse manure, not bad. Poultry manure. Hog manure, I'm sorry, I'm going to be in the next county. I don't like the smell of hog manure. It's just not me. So your browns and your greens. Browns are going to decay really slowly. Again, it's going to give you beautiful stuff. If you look under the leaves in a forest, you're going to have this black, rich humus. It's wonderful material. But it's going to take a long time to chew that elephant. So what you want to do is shred that up. It could also tie up nitrogen in the soil if it's not completely composted. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Again, tends to accumulate in the fall, so you may need to tie up a couple of garbage bags of leaves, or what I do, I just throw them in my compost bin. May need to stockpile that until you can mix it with the greens in the spring. The browns can help keep the pile aerated. So this is your roughage, is what I like to call it. So your little twigs and sticks and things like that, you don't want to shred all of them into sawdust. You want to keep some of them rough so you have some air pockets inside your compost bin. The greens will decay rapidly, consuming the pile oxygen and producing that ammonia odor. If you add any grass clippings to your compost pile, please don't be lazy like me and walk away from it and come back a week later and try and turn it, because it just mats together and then you have to pull it apart, and it's a lot easier when it's still loose to flip it through there and get it to mix. That matting can create a foul odor. You want to think about yourselves as well as your next door neighbors. You don't want to have any rotten odors, no rotten egg or ammonia odors that's going to be getting your neighbors mad at you. So you want to make sure you keep that turned and aerated. So composting with decomposers that need air. This is called aerobic decomposition. You want to stay away from anaerobic. There are bigger industrial, like dairy farms and things, that have big tanks, and they actually do what's called anaerobic decomposition with some of their manures. But that's a totally different topic. We don't have to go there. But aerobic decomposers do produce heat. So when that compost is breaking down, and you can actually put your hand over it and you can feel the warmth of that pile. And you know, in the fall, you can walk out back and you can see your steam coming off the compost. So typically active composting is between 55 and 150 degrees, roughly. You do not need a thermometer to do composting, but this is just to let you know scientifically where it works. Basically, you've got different levels of bacteria that work at different temperature zones. So the first group will get it so hot, and then they'll basically back out, and there will be another group that'll take over and get it even hotter, and then that group will leave, and then there'll be another group that'll get even hotter. And then when it gets too hot, they'll actually all back out and let it cool down a little bit, and it'll come back at it. So even during the winter months, just because the temperature outside is 32, your compost can still be working. I feed my composter all year long. As long as the generation in the pile has got air inside of it and it's got sun on it, you could still get decay and decomposition. It'll be slower throughout the winter months, but it'll still work. So my kitchen scraps go out there all year long. The high pile temperature provides the best benefits. The higher you can get that pile temperature, the more you're going to kill any diseases that you might have had from plant material you put in there. It can help kill weed seeds and other seeds. But sometimes it's hard to get it super hot. Now, I personally like to use my compost right on the ground. I like to use the worms and the other critters to come in there and help me out. But they do have it designed here. I don't know if you can see it from the back, but this is a wooden pallet. So they have this built on top of a wooden pallet. My friend Dick, who does the lawn care with his compost, he actually puts what he calls hardware cloth. It's a metal wire mesh underneath on top of the wooden pallet. So he helps hold most of the material inside there, but he still gets the airflow coming up through that wire mesh. It just helps with airflow and not dropping everything and then having to remove the pallet and dig out from underneath it. So it helps a little bit with that. But just like a warm thermal current, you know, you have the vultures and other critters that like to just cruise on that warm air. The warm air rises, so cool air is going to come in from the bottom and is going to come up and go through your bin. But you're going to have to turn your bin once in a while just so that those little pieces that keep decomposing, they'll continuously fall to the bottom by gravity and cut off that airflow. So you've got to fluff them up, move them around so that you keep air going through there. So this is actually what my neighbor has. He actually has the piping in his. He's an older gentleman. He doesn't like to turn his compost anymore than he has to, so he'll just do it that way so the airflow can get in there. So porosity is the air-filled space between the particles. I keep talking about that aeration. The browns help maintain that with the roughage. And then compacted pile is going to be tough and you won't have any airflow, so you got to turn it. So here you're talking about sticks and corn stalks, perforated pipes, or putting it up on a raised platform like that wooden pallet will help keep airflow. This guy's using an actual pitchfork to turn his pile. I just use a regular garden fork. I found that to be best. I have tried these tools. I thought it was just a little more work. Push down, turn, twist. Push down, turn, twist. Turn, twist. I just flipped my whole thing. My friend Dick had it made. He's the guy who got the smarts. He's an engineer. I am too, but he was smarter than me. He actually picks up his whole bin, puts it on another pallet, then he just shovels everything from one pallet and flips it into the other one. So he's unencumbered. I was digging through the top with mine, and I had several different bins. I actually had 4 different commercial bins at my old house. I had 2 called an earth machine, which had a small round opening, and I had 2 other ones that were rectangular. Those are a lot easier to turn. But yeah, Dick gave me the idea to just move them, and if you have the area.
Should your bin, compost bin like that, should it be in sun, partial sun?
Great question. If you have an area where you're going to be in partial sun or shade, that's the better part, so then it won't dry out too fast. If you're in full sun all the time, you're going to have to actually add water. In all the years I've been composting, I've added water once. Back in the 90s, the area I had my compost bins, they were enclosed with lids, so the water would actually hit the lid and kind of recycle. But it got so breezy and sunny at that point that I actually had to take a 5-gallon bucket and go back and put some water into it. You want to try and keep your moisture level, they say like 40 to 60%, like a damp sponge basically. I've never quite had mine that damp, but it is definitely moist inside, and mine turns out very well. I might not be 12 weeks, I'm closer to 16 weeks, but I don't turn it every week. I usually turn mine every other week. So, but 16 weeks is still a good turnaround. Okay, so here, talking about watering, you don't want it too dry. You'll slow down your bacteria. They'll be gagging. They'll have to back out and go somewhere where it's safer for them. If it's too wet, then you get odors because you don't have enough airflow. So this is exactly what you want. So perfect timing on your question. If it's too wet, you want to add browns and turn your pile. If it's too dry, you want to add water, maybe some greens. That'll also add some moisture for you. Okay. So you're constantly adding your materials to this. And a lot of people ask me, when do you know when it's finished? Do I keep adding all the time? Well, if you can get more than one, that's the best way to go. Because that way you can kind of stage your compost. You have your fresh materials coming in all the time. Your finished compost is going to be smaller pieces. It's going to drop to the bottom. And then when you go to turn it again, you can take that finished and put it to the next pile. Because they do talk about waiting and letting your compost rest for about 4 weeks before you put it in your garden. They want to make sure it's fully composted so that the carbons in there aren't like stealing nitrogen from your plants in the garden itself. So this is what they're talking about here. Your pile no longer heats after mixing. Sorry about that. When your pile no longer heats up, it's basically at that finished stage and it's ready to be put to rest on the side. You want to wait for like another 4 weeks. There's still going to be some bacterial and fungal activity going on in there, but it's going to be low level. It's not going to generate heat, but it's going to help finish that composting process. So here they're talking about, the absolute best way to go is to turn every 5 to 7 days. This is all based on, studies by Penn State and the other ag universities throughout the country. So they're saying the best way to do it is every 5 to 7 days. Again, it's whatever's convenient for you. When I first started this, every time I mowed the lawn, I'd turn the compost. Then I started getting a little lazier, and I've come to about every other week. So that's typically my way to do it. And then my bigger materials, I just kind of pile them up in there because I don't want to run my chipper shredder every week or every other week. That I typically let go like every 6 weeks or so. So like every month and a half or 2 months, I'll get out my chipper shredder and I'll break down the really big stuff. So if I have a windfall and there's a lot of tree damage like this past week where we had the heavy winds, I'll just take all those big limbs and I'll just stick those in my compost bin. I'll stick them on top. The leaves will drop off. They'll work their way down. But the rough material, the branches themselves, I'll just wait and a couple weeks, I'll just get the chipper shredder going and I'll run those through and I'll blend them in. And this is what you end up with. This is why I call it black gold. It's just beautiful material. Looks almost like coffee grounds. It's just smells earthy. There's no nasty odors. It's just beautiful material, nice and crumbly, and it just adds to your soil in so many different ways. I have been blessed with living in the Lehigh Valley a long time, so most of you probably have either shale or clay, right? Compost will help both of those. For shale, it'll help add material to it to help hold moisture. And for clay, it'll help break it up into finer material and more porous material so it can breathe and the roots can actually develop and spread. The best place I had for a garden was my son's old play yard. When I lived in Laurie Station, I had built a big wooden play set for him, and then when he outgrew it, I got rid of the play set, but I had always put mulch underneath the play set so if he would fall, he'd had some cushioning. Well, over years, this stuff was self-decomposing, and I ran a rototiller through it, and then I started adding my compost to it. This was the most productive garden I've ever had in my life. It was wonderful material. Everything was just rich black compost mixed into the clay that I had there and the quartz rocks and everything else that was mixed in. It was beautiful for a garden. So, how do you know when it's finished? You were asking about seeds, okay? There's two simple tests for telling whether or not your compost is done. You can put some of your compost mix into a Ziploc bag, wait a couple of days, open it up, do a sniff check. If it's just a nice earthy odor and there's no rotten odors or anything, you're done, it's finished. How many people want to stick their nose inside of a bag and not know whether or not you're going to get a nasty odor back? Yeah, that's not me either. Number two, this is my test. When I see my beautiful little tomato seedlings popping up, or my little melon seeds popping up, I know I've got finished compost. Because it's not too hot, and the seeds actually start to regerminate and come out. So that's how I do mine, the germination test. So I know mine's ready to go, and then I can put it back in the garden. So you can add it to your flower beds, you can add it to your vegetable gardens, or you can put it across your lawn.
But then you're also going to get tomatoes and cucumbers, etc.
Exactly. Yeah, they're so easy to pop out. And if you put a layer of wood mulch on top of it, a lot of times they won't break through, but sometimes they do. We get volunteers here and there, but yeah, that's how I know it's finished. So where should I put my compost pile? Couple of things to consider. Is it an eyesore? Do you want to keep your neighbors as friends? How close is it to a water source if you have to water it? So you want to make sure a shaded area will help so it doesn't dry out, so right to your question. Avoid areas that interfere with lawn and garden activities, so you don't want to put it right in the middle of the volleyball court in the backyard. Adequate work area to work around it. This is important when you're trying to get in there and work around it. I kind of pinched myself between my storage shed and a wood pile I had, so that's why I was digging in a circle with mine. That's when I said, got the aha idea from Dick, just pick up the whole thing, move it over if you have room, and just kind of move them around a little bit. Area for storage, so that you have an area to put your pile. As I said, I had 4 compost bins, and then I had an area right next to it. I would throw the compost on that, on the ground, and I would just let it sit there. That was my waiting area for my final stage. The last 4 weeks before I actually put it in the garden, I would just let it on the ground. So that was my storage area. And water availability, as I said, I never really had much trouble with that, with all the greens I was adding to mine. Good drainage. You wanted to keep it away from any wellheads. All the materials that are going in there, you don't want to have anything that could get in there that could go into your water system and cause any kind of bacterial contamination or anything. So you want to stay away from wellheads. Should be near where the finished compost will be used. That was mine. I was right by the storage shed in the garden area. Aesthetic considerations, for me it was perfect because I lived in a postage stamp area in, used to be a lot of cornfields in Laurie Station, became a people farm. So my neighbor's storage shed and my storage shed basically were back to back, and there was a right-of-way between the two of them. So I put my compost bins back there, so that way he didn't have to see it, I didn't have to see it. It was out of the way. And then think of your neighbor's noses. So you don't want to be, putting a stinky, smelly thing right next to their swimming pool. And if you keep it compost, turned and everything like that, you should not have odors anyway. I never really had odors, except for one time I got really lazy and I had a huge pile of grass back there that I didn't put in my bins right away. And that did get slimy and soupy, and that did get a little ammonia odor. So I learned that you don't just let grass clippings lay, you turn them in right away, no matter how tired you are. Bin construction. You name it, you can use it. You can use a garbage can. You can use the ground. You can make a wire cage. You can make a wooden cage. You can make a cage out of concrete block. They actually used railroad ties out at Rodale. They were testing to see if there would be any interference from the creosote with the composting. So I basically have a setup like this. I have two side by side, but mine are made out of 2x4s and 4x4s for a frame. And then I keep my canoe on top. So it's multi-purpose. But the reason I have two side by side, I found it's easy. If it's side by side, I could just turn this one and flip it into this one, so that it, easier to turn rather than trying to turn it all in the same side at one time. And like I said, there are plenty of commercial ones available out there. When we used to teach this class, Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection actually had a program for a while where anybody who signed up for my compost class would get a free compost bin. It was called an earth machine. Interesting little thing, look like a little R2-D2 kind of thing. Only had a small opening at the top, so you had to be careful you didn't cut your hands going in and out because it was sharp plastic. How do I know that? I did it myself. Twice. After that, I always wore gloves, or I took the top part off when I did the mixing. And then it was nice because it had a door in the front. You pick up the door off the front and your black compost would just fall out the front. You'd go in there with a fork, pull it out, and away you went with your material. So it was really nice. The other two I had were, like I said, rectangular. They just had a big open lid. That was easy to do. Those, I had gotten one from, I forget where, it was like a Home Depot or something like that, but the other one I got free from a neighbor because he was composting and never touched it. He just kept throwing stuff in there, and it's like it was dry, it was never turned, it was like, oh, I'm not using it, take it, just, no problem. So I had all this beautiful compost. So the troubleshooting, I think I've touched on this enough. Pretty much anything rotten odor, whether it's ammonia or rotten eggs, you want to turn that. Make sure you aerate it. You want to add some other materials, typically your browns, so you can get your odors out of there and get some more food in there. If you have a low pile temperature, it's not a problem. If you have too low of a pile temperature, it's just going to take a little longer for it to break down. If you're adding the green materials, mixing in with it, you're going to get a warming to your pile. So high pile temperature, I don't think that's ever going to be a problem for us. People that do commercial composting, they have these huge windrows that they make. They've got big machines that turn everything over. They could get very high temperatures because they've got a lot more material that they're composting. The pests, remember, vegetarian, vegetarian, vegetarian. As long as you keep the meat, the fish, the oils out of there, no problem. Don't bother washing your eggshells. Just crush them up and put them out there. It's a good source of calcium for your garden. You can compost in animal-proof bins, The only way I animal-proof my compost bin, it's basically, as I said, open in the front. I have a little screen that I put up there. It's not for the wild animals. I don't care if the squirrels come in and take some nuts or some, fruit scraps or whatever. I keep it there so my dogs don't go in. They like to sniff around in there, and my one dog likes to roll and stuff, so I keep her out. Worm composting is another one. Good, that's really good for food scraps. If there's any trout fishermen in here, red worms are fantastic for vermicomposting or worm composting. So you can do two things at once. You can get rid of your food scraps, and you can get some real good bait for your trout fishing season. I do have some handouts for after the talk, and vermicomposting is one of them. Not a lot of people do it, but it is good for that. The organic matter added to the soil is perfect for adding some micronutrients. It helps attract earthworms, other beneficial critters. Like I said, you're going to get sow bugs, you're going to get millipedes, centipedes, and other things coming in there to help with that breakdown of materials. You're going to get more beneficial soil microorganisms. It's going to help create a spongy effect. It's going to hold water better for you. So when we do go through drought periods, your garden is going to hold water better at your roots because of that compost. It's going to give you some micronutrients. It's going to help hold the nutrients that are in that soil better. Improve soil drainage as well, because it's going to help aerate the soil. So your clays are going to break up, become more friable, and that's going to make things move better through the soil. And it's going to help suppress some soil-borne plant pathogens. It is not considered a direct fertilizer, but it does help with all these other things we talked about. It does have the nitrogen and the carbon in there, some phosphorus that's in there. So it does help with that. And it does have a lot of trace nutrients from whatever materials you're putting in there. It's a great soil amendment, improves soil health. They recommend not putting more than 2 inches of compost on at one time. You want to work it into the top 4 to 6 inches of soil so you can help, break up the soil and make it nice and loose so that you can get real good root development. But they just don't want you to put too much in there all at one shot. You can use it for surface mulch as well. How many of you like going to the mall and seeing those mulch volcanoes? You know what I mean? The big piles up against the bark. Yeah, is that good for a tree? No. That's why the commercial people don't always have your best interests in mind when they're doing work. They want to get it done quick and they want to make money. They'll do what they think looks nice. This is the right way to put mulch out. You're supposed to put it out, this is called the drip line. You're supposed to put it out just to the drip line or a little bit further. Is there any mulch touching the tree? You know why you don't want to have it touching the tree? Bugs, critters, diseases, okay? That can actually soften the bark, okay? And can allow diseases and insects to get inside the bark, and that can actually get in and kill the Cambria, and it can actually kill your tree. If you have meadow voles in the area, they're really good at going after that soft material, and they can girdle the tree, and you can have a dead tree real quick. So yeah, it's better to keep it away from the trunk. The lawn top dressing, as I said, my friend Dick was really into this, and he had a fantastic looking lawn. I've never had that much interest in keeping my lawn super ultra neat. I like to be as organic as possible, and I don't do a lot of weed treatments and things like that. I have a lot of native plants in my lawn and in my flower beds so that I help attract the native pollinators. So I've never really done a lot of this. So my lawn is questionable, but that's the way I maintain my lawn. As a potting mix, you can use it, but they recommend no more than 1/3 compost as part of your potting mix. So you want to mix that up with vermiculite and some other materials, but no more than 1/3 of compost. And that's it. Any other comments or questions? All right, as I said, I do have some handouts if anybody's interested. I'm more than welcome to take them. If you're not going to use them, or if you're going to read them and then get rid of them, please make sure you recycle. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. That's a very interesting seminar. I think I am going home to restart my composting. I heard John before, he did a seminar for us in an outreach initiative out in the community, and I said it then and I started it, and then of course life happens, but I'm going home to redo it again. So anyway, thank you all for coming out and enjoying the program. If you do not already have a copy of our Eventful Living catalogue, please pick one up on your way out. Thank you so much.